Welcome back to the deep dive. Look, I'm speaking directly to you here. Maybe you're a learner, an entrepreneur, maybe leading an organization, or honestly, maybe just trying to get your own life a bit more structured.
Mhm.
We all face this, right? This modern challenge, just information overload.
Drowning in it.
Exactly. Drowning in data. Yeah, inspiration everywhere, slogans.
Mhm.
But what we actually need, robust organizational structures, things that genuinely work.
Yeah, because the gap between, let's say, ambition and actually achieving something, so often it just boils down to the quality of your system.
Right. Whether you're trying to scale a big company or launching a small startup, maybe just managing a, complex community project.
Sure.
The big question isn't just what your mission is. It's how do you embed that mission so it actually lasts, so it resists entropy and scales beyond just the initial founders.
That's the core of it. And today, we're pulling out a major organizational blueprint from, well, a pretty surprising historical source, I think.
Definitely surprising. It offers these lessons in structural discipline that are just timeless.
We're extracting some powerful, deeply structured insights about rapid organizational change from the history of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in Medina.
And specifically focusing on Masjid Nabawi, the Prophet's mosque.
Exactly. And our source material, it frames this structure that was built almost immediately after the migration, not just as, a place for prayer.
Right. Not just worship.
No, it sees it as the first organizational blueprint of the new Islamic community, a complex, multifunctional model. And it argues this model is still relevant, even now, in the age of AI and rapid tech change.
Wow. So we're talking about the actual organizational architecture that allowed, scattered individuals to become this global force really quickly.
That's the claim, the structure that enabled that transformation.
Okay, let's really unpack this then. Our mission for this deep dive, it's pretty focused. We've got 3 core questions pulled straight from the source material you shared. First, how did the Prophet, peace be upon him, actually build those foundational organizational structures right after the Hijra, that huge migration?
Right, the immediate steps.
Second, why was Masjid Nabawi, structurally speaking, the organizational beating heart, the nerve center that tied everything together for the community? And third, and this is maybe the most critical for listeners today, what specific, scalable, structural lessons can modern organizations, institutions, startups, whatever, learn from this model, especially now with our current tech climate?
And the core idea running through all of this, it sounds simple, maybe, but it's incredibly hard to actually pull off.
What's that?
True. Lasting transformation, the kind that, survives leadership changes, economic crises, all that stuff. It requires this intense focus on the triad of effective mission, systems, and accountability.
Mission, systems, accountability.
That's the structural discipline. And it's way more important ultimately than any motivational poster or, catchy slogan.
Yeah, that sounds like the real deep dive. Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning, Medina. The challenge they face, the source material talks about this problem of slogans, where you have high energy, maybe charisma, but it just doesn't create lasting institutions. We see this all the time today, right?
Yeah.
Companies with amazing vision statements.
But zero operational framework underneath.
Yeah. So why is just relying on that initial buzz, that enthusiasm, why is that basically a guaranteed path to failure?
Well, because slogans are cheap.
Right.
And enthusiasm, it fades. It's temporary.
Sure.
They generate hype. Yeah, absolutely. But they can't enforce consistency. They can't maintain standards day to day. They certainly can't resolve conflicts when things get tough.
Right.
Real transformation, the kind that lasts for generations, it has to be rooted in concrete systems, formalized processes, things that survive the founders' initial energy burst or their personality.
So if the vision isn't embedded, if it's not part of the daily grind, the verifiable structure, exactly. If it doesn't dictate who does what, when they do it, how they do it, then it's just nice words. It's poetry. And, poetry doesn't run a state or a successful company.
That idea of structural reality, that's key. The source really details the huge organizational challenge the Prophet, peace be upon him, faced when he arrived. You've got this mix of immigrants, the Muhajirun, who'd lost basically everything.
Uprooted.
And then merging them with the locals, the Ansar, who themselves were, divided by old tribal issues.
Yeah, long-standing feuds. It was a recipe for chaos, really.
Absolutely. So how did he take these scattered individuals and forge them into a cohesive ummah, a single community?
Well, it wasn't through like endless committee meetings or bureaucratic memos.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
it was through immediate action. Physical, symbolic, structural action. The very first physical act wasn't just giving sermons, it was defining space, defining processes, defining a whole new social contract, essentially.
And the masjid was central to that.
Building the masjid, which we'll get into more, was a big statement. It declared, okay, there's a new institution now. It's governed by new rules. And this is the central organizing principle, overriding those old tribal loyalties, those previous norms. It was a physical manifestation of the new order.
That transition from individuals to institutions, that's maybe the hardest jump for any startup, any new movement, even a nation.
It really is.
You're moving from trust in a person, I trust the leader, to trust in the system, I trust the process.
Exactly. And here's the core organizational insight, I think, that we need to take from the source material. The vision of any organization, doesn't matter if it's spiritual, commercial, nonprofit, it only survives, it only becomes scalable when it's embedded into reliable structures and processes.
Right.
Think about it. If your great idea for a service or a product relies entirely on the founder remembering every single detail or making every single call,
It breaks down.
it breaks down. The moment you hit, say, 50 people, 100 people, it just grinds to a halt. The system itself has to be able to absorb new people, delegate complex tasks reliably without the founder being the bottleneck.
So structural discipline, it's like the language that makes a vision endure.
That's a great way to put it.
Without structure, every decision feels like a crisis, right?
Yeah.
You need a hero leader to swoop in.
Yeah, reactive firefighting.
But with structure, every decision is ideally a predefined step in a process that can scale, and that allows even, newer members to contribute effectively without needing constant guidance.
Absolutely. And that's the difference, isn't it, between a leader who just gives inspiring speeches and a leader who builds an organization that actually lasts maybe 1,000 years. It's that commitment to building this structure, the discipline.
Yeah.
They understood that the physical space, the established systems, that was the memory. That was the operational heart of the mission itself.
Okay, let's zoom in on that physical and conceptual center, the Masjid Nabawi. The sources really hammer home the significance of building this immediately after the Hijra.
Yeah, top priority.
It wasn't like, oh, we'll get to it later. It was foundational. What does that immediate focus tell us about, organizational architecture?
It tells us that for any mission, any big project to succeed, you absolutely need a central hub, an undeniable multifunctional nerve center.
The nerve center, like the...
Yeah, a place where all the different threads of the organization, the strategic thinking, the finances, the education, the social stuff, where it all comes together.
And it doesn't have to be physical today, necessarily.
Right. Today, it might be a really well-structured digital ecosystem, maybe. But it has to be defined. It has to be, in a way, sacred to the mission. And it must be capable of integrating all those diverse functions. For them, the masjid was the strategic HQ, it was the engine room, and it was a community lifeline, all rolled into one pretty humble structure initially.
Humble? Yeah, but incredibly functional. The sources break down its role into 6 core complex functions. And this is where it gets really interesting for modern parallels, because it just shatters that idea of it being just a place for prayer.
Totally. It was the complete organizational package. And that comprehensive, multi-layered role, that's the blueprint for staying relevant, I think.
Okay, let's dedicate some real time to these 6 roles, because as you said, they seem to map almost directly onto what any thriving modern institution needs.
They really do. Let's walk through them.
Okay, first, the foundation, worship, the spiritual core. That makes sense. It established the shared purpose, the binding values, but organizationally, what else did it do?
Organizationally, it provided rhythm, structure, the clock, basically. The 5 daily prayers.
Yeah.
They provided consistency, right? They defined the community's entire time structure. And crucially, they ensured mandatory regular attendance at the central hub.
So it wasn't just spiritual, it was logistical.
It was an embedded system for mandatory alignment and communication. Think of it like a scheduled, non-negotiable daily stand-up meeting for the entire community, 5 times a day. It ensured nobody drifted too far from the central mission or the key information flows.
Wow. Okay. Second role, education. And not just basic religious instruction, right? It was a learning center, a university almost.
Exactly. And the primary structure for that was the al-Sufa, the people of the bench.
Tell us about them.
These were dedicated individuals, often poor or maybe without family ties there, who literally lived on a raised platform, the Sufa, right next to the masjid.
So full immersion.
Full immersion. They weren't just students, though. They were like the community's full-time training corps. They were the R&D department, the outreach team. They dedicated themselves to learning directly from the Prophet, peace be upon him, and then they were deployed.
Where?
As teachers, as envoys, as administrators to new communities that were embracing Islam. So in modern terms, think of it like your dedicated, maybe residential corporate academy, or a specialist think tank focused on constantly transferring organizational knowledge.
Making sure knowledge didn't just stay with the leader.
Precisely. It was systematically distributed. Scalable knowledge transfer.
Okay, third, administration. Running the community, governance, handling resources. How did the masjid function as the early ops and maybe HR department?
Well, initially, administration relied heavily on direct access, right? People could approach the Prophet, peace be upon him, right there in the masjid grounds. Decisions were made, people got appointed, resources were allocated, often in public view.
Transparency again.
Yeah, and crucially, the masjid provided the infrastructure, however basic at first, for record keeping. You had scribes taking dictation, messengers being dispatched. It was the central node for managing the flow of people and information. It ensured every key governmental or administrative decision had a physical, known, central point of origin that the community could see and track. Got it. Fourth function, welfare, the social safety net, aid distribution center. This sounds a bit like maybe an integrated CSR department and a community foundation rolled into one.
It was arguably much more dynamic, more foundational than modern CSR often is. Think about the muwakat system.
The brotherhood pairings.
Exactly. Pairing an immigrant, a muhajir, with a local host, an ansar, into this formalized brotherhood. That was a structural mechanism for welfare from day one. It provided immediate financial support, housing, emotional security.
Built right into the social fabric.
Right. And the masjid was the place where zakat, the mandatory charity, was collected and then redistributed according to clear, established rules. It wasn't just helping the poor, it was actively managing community risk and poverty. It showed that the organization saw social stability, economic justice, as direct parts of its core mission, not some optional add-on.
Integrated, not optional.
Okay.
Fifth, strategy. This is the planning hub, the decision-making center. Big decisions, military campaigns, diplomacy, debated and decided right there.
Yes. This was the executive suite, the war room, if you like. How was strategy formalized, though? Was it just the leader deciding?
Through the principle of sure consultation. While, yes, the final decision rested with the Prophet, peace be upon him, the system required formalized consultation with key leaders, elders, people with relevant experience.
So input was structured in.
It wasn't just casual chat. It was an organizational mechanism designed to test strategic options against collective wisdom, ensure buy-in from key stakeholders. When the community faced major threats, like the Battle of the Trench.
The defensive trench around Medina.
Exactly. The strategic planning for that, where to dig, how to organize the defense, it happened right there, in and around the masjid complex. It proved its role as the undisputed center for high-stakes organizational decision-making.
Okay, and the final function, number 6, dispute resolution. The judicial, the arbitration function. This sounds like the legal and compliance department, basically, essential for holding things together.
Absolutely vital. Remember, this new community was a mix of different tribes, different backgrounds, different customs. They needed an impartial, final legal authority that everyone respected, one that superseded those old tribal ways of settling scores.
How did that work in practice?
Well, initially, the Prophet, peace be upon him, often resolved disputes directly right there in the masjid. But as things grew, that authority was systematically delegated. Specific individuals were trained and appointed as judges, qadis.
So institutionalizing justice.
Exactly. It meant people knew where to go. They knew how conflicts would be mediated. They trusted that the rules, based on divine revelation and the Prophet's precedent, would be applied consistently and transparently. Without a recognized impartial system for, let's call it legal compliance, any organization, especially a new state, just fractures from internal conflict.
What really stands out looking at all 6 is how integrated it was. This single hub wasn't just doing one thing. It handled worship, education, admin, welfare, strategy, and justice. They didn't split these off into separate, disconnected agencies across the city.
No, it was all centralized, physically, conceptually, under one mission, one roof, essentially.
And the modern parallel seems so stark, like you said. Institutions today, community centers, think tanks, schools, even corporations, they have to juggle these complex, multi-layered roles to stay relevant, don't they?
They absolutely do. If your central organization, whatever it is, only does one narrow thing say, just focusing on quarterly profits or just offering niche religious services, it very quickly disconnects from the holistic needs of its people, its stakeholders.
And then it becomes irrelevant.
It becomes irrelevant to the wider world it claims it wants to influence or serve. Integration is the key to relevance. That's the lesson here. Yeah. Hashtag tag 3. Mission-centric leadership and holistic purpose.
Okay, so this inherent complexity, this integration of roles, it brings us to the nature of the mission itself. The source material really emphasizes that the Masjid's mission was deliberately holistic.
Explicitly so.
It covered spiritual, social, political, and economic dimensions all at once. It wasn't just one track.
And that structural commitment to holism, it fundamentally changes how you operate, doesn't it?
How so?
It means you can't just optimize for one single function, like, say, maximizing financial return, if it comes at the expense of another core part of the mission, like social justice or community welfare.
Right, they have to be balanced.
Exactly. The Prophet, peace be upon him, modeled this purpose-driven leadership. Every decision, whether it was about setting market rules or planning a defensive strategy, it was anchored back to that multi-dimensional purpose. And that provides a really strong model for leaders today who are, increasingly feeling the pressure to balance shareholder demands with broader stakeholder needs, ethical concerns, societal impact.
That makes sense. If an organization's purpose is just, say, maximize profit, well, the leaders can find ways to justify almost anything, can't they?
Sadly, yes. Environmental shortcuts, maybe exploiting labor, sometimes even deception, if it serves that narrow quarterly target.
But if the mission explicitly includes justice, social welfare, ethical education, then every action, every decision has to pass a much tougher, broader test, a relevance test.
Precisely. That foundational purpose becomes a kind of built-in mechanism for self-regulation. It provides ethical guardrails.
Yeah.
For instance, when the central market was established in Medina, it wasn't just, okay, go trade. It was immediately followed by strict rules against cheating, fraud, hoarding essential goods.
So economic activity had to serve the bigger mission.
It had to serve the larger social and ethical mission. It couldn't undermine it. The critical lesson here, I think, for any organization listening, you start losing relevance fast if your mission becomes either too vague and diffuse, or, conversely, if it gets hyper-focused on just one single, often materialistic metric.
And this commitment to a deep, holistic purpose, it also seems to provide incredible organizational resilience, especially in tough times.
Oh, absolutely.
The source asks this really pointed question. Why do companies focused only on profit often just collapse during a major crisis? While organizations that are genuinely mission-driven seem to have this resilience, this ability to endure, maybe even thrive through adversity.
It's because the profit-only goal creates a fundamentally fragile structure, psychologically and socially.
How fragile?
Well, think about it. When the economy tanks or disaster strikes, what's the reason for employees or the community to stick by that profit-only company? The sole reason for its existence, the profit, has vanished. There's no deeper well of loyalty or social capital to draw on.
It's purely transactional.
Exactly. But a genuinely mission-driven organization, one focused on a deep community need or an ethical purpose, like the Masjid model, it has other resources. It can pivot. It might have to sacrifice profit temporarily, sure, maybe even scale back resources. But it can draw on that deep well of social capital, that trust built through years of focusing on welfare, justice, education.
Because its core purpose hasn't vanished.
Its core purpose is still there, even if the financial results are down. And that enduring trust, that sense of shared, meaningful purpose, that becomes the ultimate intangible asset. It's like an insurance policy against total collapse.
Yeah, it's the difference between just having transactions and having real institutional commitment from people.
Well said. Hashtag tag 24. Establishing scalable systems and processes.
Okay, so you've got the central vision, the mission. We've got the central hub, the masjid. Now we need to get into the plumbing, I guess, the systems and processes that make it all scale up.
Right, the operational mechanics.
The source defines this core organizational equation really clearly. Systems equals scalability.
It's fundamental. Without established systems that are ideally written down, trained, reinforced, the source basically warns that chaos just takes over. Vision gets lost in the noise.
You can see that happening easily.
Yeah. Charisma might get you started with, say, 50 people. But only reliable systems can scale that vision to a community of tens of thousands or, a modern company with global operations.
Because if every single critical process, like onboarding new people or deciding how to allocate resources, needs the founder to personally sign off.
You hit a ceiling, a hard ceiling on growth. The moment that founder gets overwhelmed or sick or just needs a day off, the whole thing can grind to a halt. The system has to be bigger than any one individual.
The sources you shared are full of specific examples of systems being put in place right away in Medina. And these weren't just vague ideas, were they? They were standardized procedures.
Yeah, verifiable processes.
Yeah.
Let's take the one we touched on, zakat collection and standardized distribution. That sounds like finance and logistics, right?
Definitely. How was that systematized?
Well, it required several key components to make it scalable. First, you needed standardization and assessment. The NISAB rules clear criteria for who was obligated to pay zakat and how much. That provided clarity.
Removes ambiguity.
Exactly. Second, you needed dedicated personnel. The appointment of specific collectors and accountants. This ensured a reliable, predictable flow of funds. It moved the whole process from being just voluntary, maybe ad hoc charity, to something more like formalized resource pooling or taxation.
Okay.
And third, you needed clear rules for allocation, how the collected funds would be distributed. The Quran itself specifies the 8 categories of recipients. This took away arbitrary decision-making by the distributors and built public trust in the fairness of the system.
So it's basically institutional finance and logistics fully operationalized right from the start. And that enabled the whole welfare mission we talked about.
Precisely. It ensured that welfare wasn't just a nice idea. It could actually function consistently and fairly at scale.
That consistency is key for community confidence. Okay, another example. Clear rules and processes for dispute handling, the judicial function. How did they standardize that beyond just the leader making a quick ruling?
The standardization came through establishing precedent and then systematically delegating authority. Initially, yes, the prophet, peace be upon him, was the main judge. But as the community grew and spread out geographically, he started appointing governors and judges, qadis in outlying areas.
Sending them out
With clear mandates, clear procedural instructions based on the established principles. This meant justice could be administered locally, consistently, without everyone having to travel back to the central hub in Medina for every little dispute.
That's real organizational maturity, isn't it? Decentralizing the execution.
While centralizing the ethical standards and the legal precedent, yes.
Right. And the third big example, the structured organization of the military. This had to be more than just tribal raiding parties, right? It needed complex systems.
Oh, absolutely. Warfare demands the highest level of structural discipline. You needed systems for a clear command hierarchy, who reports to whom. You needed structured delegation of authority, especially when sending out multiple expeditions simultaneously. And you needed serious logistics planning. How do you provision troops? Gather intelligence reliably, maintain communication lines.
These systems had to be robust.
They had to be robust enough to handle multiple operations at once, maybe in different directions, without everything dissolving into chaos. The central leader wasn't physically present on that specific campaign. It proves that systems aren't just for, peacetime efficiency. They're absolutely mandatory for survival in high-stress, high-stakes environments.
So pulling that together, it highlights the core elements of structure needed today, too. Clear rules defining outcomes. Systematic delegation of authority built on trust, yes, but also on training. And built-in accountability mechanisms within those systems.
You can't just delegate serious responsibility without a system to support the person you're delegating to, and a way to check if it's being done right.
Exactly.
And this connects directly to how we should think about technology today, especially AI. We're in this rush, often, to automate everything.
The AI revolution.
But the Medina model, the source reminds us, suggests that automation, like AI tools, should be implemented to serve established systems and structures. Systems that already reflect our core mission and values.
Not the other way around.
Not the other way around. If you just throw AI at a chaotic, maybe ethically weak, or poorly defined human process, you don't magically get efficiency. you get automated chaos. Or worse, you get automated injustice, just scaled up faster.
Yeah.
The foundational purpose, the human design structure, the ethical framework that has to remain primary, technology, AI, it should be the servant of that system, helping execute it more efficiently, perhaps. It should never be allowed to become the architect of the mission itself.
So a chaotic organization that just buys a lot of AI tools.
It's just amplifying its own chaos.
Yeah.
Probably making it worse, faster.
Yeah.
Hashtag patch tag 5. Accountability, transparency, and sustaining trust.
Okay, so you've built your systems
Yeah.
for finance, for justice, for strategy, but how do you make sure they actually work fairly? How do you prevent them from becoming corrupt or just bureaucratic nightmares?
Accountability. Rigorous accountability.
And the source material seems to really zero in on the role of leaders here, specifically leaders being held accountable themselves. The prophet, peace be upon him, modeling this principle.
It's absolutely non-negotiable if you want to build long-term institutional trust. And trust really is the ultimate organizational currency.
It's not just a nice to have.
No way. Trust doesn't come from a slick marketing campaign or, putting your mission statement up on the wall. It comes from seeing accountability in action. Verifiable, structural accountability. And the sources give us these powerful historical examples of radical transparency, sometimes even involving people openly challenging the leader.
Let's look at those mechanisms. One clear one was the transparent distribution of spoils of war. How did that work to build trust?
Because the resources weren't just handed out secretly or, given to favorites behind closed doors. They were allocated according to clear, publicly known legal criteria derived directly from the Quran.
So the process itself was the trust mechanism.
Exactly. The community saw the process. They understood the rules.
Yeah.
They could witness the fairness or lack thereof firsthand. And if someone felt they'd been shortchanged or something wasn't right, there was a recognized public forum, often the masjid itself, to raise that objection.
It's like an immediate public audit of resource allocation.
That's a good way to think of it.
Yeah.
It ensures leaders and administrators can't just quietly siphon off wealth or divert funds to their own pet projects without scrutiny.
And that connects directly to the broader practice mentioned, public audits of decisions and resources. In any modern organization, if you hide the numbers or you hide the methodology behind a big decision like who gets promoted or how funding is allocated,
You immediately breed suspicion, gossip, organizational toxicity. It's inevitable.
whereas a public audit, or at least transparent criteria,
It affirms the organization's commitment to the integrity of the process over anyone's personal gain or bias. We have accounts of people openly questioning decisions, maybe about resource distribution or fairness, and the leader welcoming that scrutiny, providing a public explanation, or even correcting the decision if warranted.
that shows the system is real.
It shows the accountability system was structural, it was accessible to everyone, not just some internal review committee hidden away somewhere.
And maybe the most powerful aspect here is the institutional willingness to correct mistakes. Accountability isn't just about punishment, is it? It's about having a way to fix things, to admit when the system or a decision was flawed, even if it was well-intentioned.
That institutional humility, that capacity for self-correction, it builds much deeper, more robust trust than pretending you're perfect ever could.
Right, because organizations that act infallible.
They eventually shatter when a real mistake inevitably gets exposed. But an organization that builds in mechanisms for learning from errors, doing proper postmortems, having open discussions about what went wrong, it demonstrates resilience. It confirms that core lesson. Transparency sustains trust.
And if your systems are opaque, if leaders seem to operate by a different set of rules,
That trust erodes incredibly quickly. And then the whole mission, the whole organization, becomes vulnerable to internal politics, cynicism, and decay.
the connection to today feels unavoidable, especially with big data algorithms making decisions.
Oh, absolutely. Organizational credibility now relies so heavily on transparent data handling, on adhering to strong, verifiable AI ethics.
Explain that.
Well, if a leader uses some complex algorithm to make crucial resource decisions, let's say, deciding who gets a promotion or who qualifies for a loan, but they refuse to explain the underlying data or the weightings in the algorithm or its potential biases,
That destroys trust.
it destroys credibility, just as surely as hiding the spoils of war would have back then. The principle is timeless. The more power an organization wields, whether it's political power, financial power, or now algorithmic power.
The greater the need for visible, structural, public accountability.
Exactly. It has to keep pace.
Yeah.
Hashtags tag 6. Community empowerment and decentralization.
Okay, so we've talked about the heart, the masjid, as the nerve center, and the circulatory system, the processes and accountability. Now let's talk about how that energy, that capacity, spread through the whole body. The masjid wasn't just a control center, it was also a crucial training ground.
Yes, a training ground for leadership, for participation. The aim was to ensure every member of the community felt they had a meaningful, defined role within the overall structure.
Moving beyond just a few key players.
It's that critical shift organizationally from relying entirely on centralized genius,
Yeah.
the one brilliant leader, to fostering empowered participation across the board.
Because the goal wasn't just for a central authority to serve the community.
No, it was to build the community's capacity to govern itself, to serve itself, to carry the mission forward. This structural focus on leadership development, on capacity building, is the absolute key to long-term scalability and resilience.
We saw that with the Al-Sufa again, didn't we? They weren't just passive students.
Not at all. They were active trainees who were then rapidly sent out as functional leaders, teachers, administrators, judges to new settlements, carrying the organizational DNA with them.
And this capacity building, it seems, was rooted in inclusivity by design, which, for that historical period, feels pretty radical.
It really does. The source material emphasizes that women, youth, elders, they weren't sidelined. They were included, given defined roles within the organizational structure. They contributed to governance discussions, to welfare initiatives, even to logistical support during conflict.
So exclusion wasn't just unfair, it was inefficient.
Exclusion is organizational fragility, really. When you deliberately sideline segments of your population, or in a company, segments of your talent pool, you're intentionally limiting your own capacity. You're limiting your diversity of thought, your access to skills you don't even know you're missing.
How is this inclusion strategic?
Well, women played recognized roles in medical care and logistics during battles. They were active in the marketplace. Youth, sometimes, were given command roles where maybe their energy and willingness to take risks were valuable. It wasn't just tokenism. This diversity of input genuinely strengthened the entire system's adaptability and reach.
Okay, this leads us into a really interesting organizational tension. Centralization versus empowerment.
It's a fundamental choice every organization makes, consciously or not.
How does the Masjid model lean?
It clearly leans towards empowerment. Centralization tends to hoard power, right? It relies entirely on the judgment, maybe the infallible judgment, of one leader or a tiny group at the top. That makes the whole organization brittle. If that center fails, everything fails.
Whereas empowerment
distributes responsibility. It distributes trust. It distributes capability across the entire network. That creates a far more resilient, adaptable structure. The Masjid model wasn't about hoarding power. It was about empowering members, training people in the systems, trusting them to govern themselves justly, decentralizing responsibility wherever feasible.
So when a regional governor or a military leader was appointed and sent out,
They carried the organizational trust with them. They carried the system's blueprint, the principles, the processes. They weren't just carrying a list of personalized instructions from the center that would become useless if circumstances changed.
so the real strength isn't just how well the center works.
It's how capably the periphery, the distributed parts, can function independently but still cohesively, aligned with the core mission and values.
That's a powerful idea.
And it leads right into our final connection with modern organizational structures. Think about how effective decentralized teams can be today, especially when they're supported by the right tools.
Like remote work tools, collaboration platforms, AI.
Exactly. Modern tools, including AI, can potentially handle a lot of the standardized repetitive tasks now. That could free up empowered individuals, distributed across the whole organization, to focus on the really complex stuff. Nuanced decision-making, local innovation, adapting to specific regional challenges.
Without having to run every little thing up the flagpole to a centralized HQ.
Precisely. The foundational structure we see in the Masjid-as-Hub model, one that created capacity for individual growth and distributed leadership, that's exactly what modern, agile, resilient organizations are striving for today. It shows that smart decentralization, built on strong shared systems and values, is a pathway to real strength. #TechTagOutro.
Wow. We have covered a huge amount of ground here. We've gone from, the problems with just slogans all the way through systems architecture for finance, justice, strategy, accountability, and now decentralization and empowerment. Let's try to synthesize the core organizational blueprint we've extracted from this deep dive into the Medina model.
Okay, I think there are three fundamental takeaways. First, the Masjid Nabawi model just powerfully demonstrates that you have to combine your core values, your spiritual or ethical mission, with rigorous structural discipline. The systems.
Can't have one without the other.
You need both, working together, reinforcing each other. Second, enduring transformation really does hinge on that triad we identified. Mission plus systems plus accountability.
Mission, systems, accountability.
Yeah. If you neglect or remove any one of those pillars, the source suggests the whole structure just becomes unstable. It'll likely collapse under its own weight or certainly buckle during the first real crisis.
And the third takeaway.
Third, we saw this clearly with the examples of public audits and correcting mistakes. Transparent leadership is the only real currency for building and sustaining institutional trust. That trust is vital, both internally with your team and externally with your stakeholders or community.
Okay, so this isn't just history. Let's make it actionable for everyone listening. We want to give you the source material's own suggested action notes. Think of it as direct homework for your personal life or your organization this week.
All right, 4 quick actions. First, take some time, seriously reflect, and identify your own personal or organizational Masjid Nabawi. What is your central, maybe even sacred, hub of mission? Where does your strategic planning, your community work or social impact efforts, your learning and growth, where does it all actually come together? If you don't have one clearly defined, define it, even if it's virtual.
Okay, number 2.
Second, don't just think about what you want to achieve. Draft 3 specific written systems that you need right now to make your work or your passion project more scalable. Stop relying on just enthusiasm or your own memory. Write down the actual standardized, repeatable procedure for at least 3 recurring tasks.
Get it out of your head and onto paper or into a process doc.
Done.
Third,
Do a quick, honest accountability audit. Ask yourself, who checks my decisions? How often does that happen? Is that process transparent to the people affected, like your team or your partners? If the only accountability you have rests entirely on your own conscience, you have a major structural vulnerability just waiting to cause problems.
That's a tough one, but crucial. And finally, number 4.
Finally, take one concrete step this week towards building genuine inclusivity and empowerment. Give one new role, one piece of significant responsibility to someone who is maybe currently overlooked in your team, your project, or even your family life. Maybe it's a younger person, a quieter team member, the newest hire. Actively start decentralizing your current power structure, even in a small way.
4 concrete steps. Identify your hub, write down systems, audit accountability, and empower someone new.
This whole deep dive, it wasn't just about looking back at history. It was about understanding how to build structures that last, structures that empower people, and structures that operate justly. It suggests that real, sustainable organizational success is fundamentally about systemic integrity.
Which leads us perfectly into our final provocative thought for you to really mull over, maybe as you start restructuring your own world based on these ideas. How different could modern corporate culture or institutional culture actually be if the relentless pursuit of structural discipline and efficiency, world of systems, processes, AI optimization, was deliberately, formally, and consistently combined with an overriding commitment to deep ethical or spiritual values, ensuring that our systems always serve people in purpose and never ever the other way around?
That connection or potential disconnection between ethics and efficiency, we're thinking about.
Definitely something to reflect on. This has been The Deep Dive.